Hello, my name is Justin Ehrlich, and I am an assistant professor of computer science and sport analytics at Syracuse University. My co-author is Joel Potter, where he is an associate professor of economics. What we're going to be talking about today is how fans respond to different types of play. And the main question here is, do offensive players generate more revenue than defensive players in the Major League Baseball? So we're going to be looking at both revenue and attendance. So to give you some background, teams have been operating under the assumption that fans do prefer offensive plays to pitching or defensive plays. You just can look at the top contracts. Bryce Harper last year received a $330 million contract, and Mike Trout received a $360 million contract. Both the top contracts in sports. So our research question, the main research question is, should teams be investing more in offensive player, good hitters, than defensive players? In other words, is the market efficient? And so to answer this, we're going to have a couple other questions. So to what extent do fans prefer offensive plays in terms of attendance to other types of plays? We also want to ask the same question, but in terms of revenue. So we want to break apart attendance at the ballpark from revenue. And so the reason why is because a lot of the larger markets, attendance doesn't matter so much because there's so much money coming in from the big TV deals. So for some background literature, there's been lots of studies about how team performance can predict attendance. And there's also been studies about how offensive plays can also increase attendance or predict attendance. There was a nice natural study back in 1973 when the American League voted in the designated hitter rule, which right afterwards there was a spike in attendance, and there have been studies that show that spike was significant, and it was due to the designated hitter rule, which means that the increasing the offensive types of plays increases attendance. And same thing happened in more modern eras, including the '94 strike and the steroid era, that it didn't really change anything. So even though attendance overall dropped in '95, there was still a strong correlation between wins, in particular offensive plays that produce those wins, and attendance. And then the steroid era, of course, that just blew up offensive plays, and teams also responded positively to increased offensive type of plays. But the limitation here is two main limitations. So the first one is they're not using any of the new sabermetrics. And the second, the biggest problem is that none of these studies took into consideration defense or pitching. They weren't comparing offensive plays to any other types of plays, and yet teams have been assuming that offensive plays are what matters to fans. So that's what we want to do. We want to break that apart, and we want to do comparisons. We want to decompose wins into offensive types of wins, defensive types, pitching, and determine what do fans really prefer. And so the perfect metric for this would be wins above replacement. And so the nice thing with wins above replacement is that there's already been a lot of work on how to decompose win above replacement. So it's already been done for us. We have O WAR, we have D WAR, and we have pitching WAR. And so those three combined give you the overall WAR. So there has been I was part of a previous study, so was Joel Potter on this, and we looked at the free agents and how much they were being paid in terms of what they were providing relative to D WAR, P WAR, and O WAR. And we found that yes, teams do have a bias towards O WAR and pay a lot more for O WAR rather than D WAR or P WAR. And that's a little surprising because those are interchangeable. So if you have a strong team with D WAR versus a strong team with, say, O WAR, if overall WAR is the same, they'd be an equal match. But the team owners might be rational if fans actually do have a preference. So if they are getting more money or more attendees to their games based upon these more offensive-based players, then it would be a rational choice to pay out a lot more for O-War than D-War or P-War. The problem is no one's actually done this study. No one's actually looked to see if that's true, if fans have a preference to offensive production or not. So that's what this presentation is all about. And so we're going to be using baseball references WAR. And so the definition there is that a replacement team has a winning percentage of .294. You multiply that by 162, then you get per season 47.628 games won. And so any wins above that would be your wins above replacement. So for instance, if a team won roughly 49, if they run 49 games, then their team WAR above replacement should be 1.4. So the way Baseball Reference breaks this down is they first split batters WAR from pitchers WAR, and looking at batters WAR, we get O-War and D-War. And so O-War, of course, would be hitting WAR, D-War would be fielding WAR. The issue here is that they include positional adjustments in both D-War and O-War. So when you add them together, you get you get more than batters WAR. And so there's an overlap there. And so what we did a modification of offensive WAR. We call it M-O-War, and that's just batters WAR minus D-War. So now our offensive WAR does not have a positional adjustment. It's strictly based upon hitter, and that makes sense. It doesn't matter what your position is. If you're a good hitter, you're a good hitter, and you bring in the same amount of WAR. Okay, so the team overall WAR is based upon modified O-War plus P-War plus D-War, and these are what we're going to be focusing on to see what exactly the response that fans have in terms of attendance and revenue. So all the data, all the stats, WAR, O-War, D-War, and O-War, those are all graphed from Baseball Reference, and we're looking at 9 years of data, so from 2010 to the 2018 season. Since we're looking at revenue, we also need to make sure that we are including inflation, so adjusting based upon inflation. We're also looking at GDP per market, so that obviously is going to, being in a larger market, is going to increase the revenue. So we want to control by the GDP of that market. And so this is the metropolitan market. And so all this data was taken from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We have population data taken from U.S. Census, and then we also grabbed all the Canadian equivalents from StatCan. And then we want to look at new stadiums. So a new stadium is going to predict a higher attendance for a few years after the stadium has been built and introduced. So we grabbed all that from Wikipedia. We looked at TV deals that came from Fangraphs. Revenue data came from Forbes, and then ticket prices came from Ticket IQ. One thing we had to address before we did any regression was revenue sharing. So MLB does have revenue sharing. 48% of all revenue per team goes into a pot, and then from that pot, 3.3% goes back to each team. So this smooths out a lot of that revenue. So in 2018, each team received $118 million. But we're looking at fan response, so we don't want that smoothing effect that revenue sharing produces. So we need pre-revenue, and so we just we transform the data to give us the pre-revenue. And so here's some visualizations, some scatter plot visualizations. These are just based upon attendance, and you can see. So the first top left is O-War, and actually that's modified O-War. Then we have D-War. Bottom left we have P-War, and then middle bottom is WAR overall, and they all have a positive relationship between WAR and the attendance. And then if you look at top right, we just have wins, and like every other study has said, that wins predict attendance, and that's definitely true here. We also included what we call lucky wins. So what a lucky win is, the way we define a lucky win was any wins above the predicted number of wins based upon WAR. And so that of course can be negative or positive. And so this just looks at the random fluctuations of a win and whether or not that also motivates fans to attend. And yes, it does. And then I also created a visualization just looking at the top teams and whether or not there's a trend on how they mix up their revenue. And so this is for 2015, and this is for all the teams that made the playoffs. And I created a dashboard, an interactive dashboard, and I also put it online so you can go to this bit.ly URL. And what it allows you to do is there's a drop-down box to choose the season. And in this case, you can look at the very left side. We have St. Louis. The bright blue is O-WAR, the orange is P-WAR, and the dark blue is D-WAR. So most of these teams don't spend much on D-WAR. They spend either on O-WAR or P-WAR. So we have St. Louis spending more on P-WAR, and then we have, on the very right side, we have Toronto spending more on O-WAR. So this just kind of shows you that there's no real trend, at least in terms of O-WAR versus P-WAR, on where the revenue goes. Here's all the parameters we'll be using for our models. The TV deals, that's just a dummy variable. It's just whether or not they had a TV deal during that season. I think everything else is self-explanatory. We did have this Delta League attendance, and that's just the average. That's the total attendance for the entire league minus the team's attendance. So that way, if there's any effect league-wise, we'll be controlling any effect league-wise into our models. And here's the result of running the regression, predicting attendance. And so we're using teams as fixed effects. So we have a base attendance, and that includes number of team wins, and then we added the WAR components to the second model. And what's important here is you look at the coefficients of the second model in terms of O-WAR, P-WAR, D-WAR, and the lucky wins. These are not statistically different from each other. So that right there shows you that attendees don't care about how a team wins, just that they win. So on the first model, number of team wins, we have a very strong association between number of teams wins and attendance. With the right side, does the same thing, but with the WAR being decomposed. Now let's go to revenue, and same thing. So there's more of a difference with lucky wins, and that makes sense. So lucky wins is less than the other three types of WAR, but that's because this incorporates TV deals, and TV deals are a long time in the making, and they won't be taking into account lucky wins. But again, these are not statistically different from each other, these coefficients. So again, we have the attendance itself doesn't matter. Fans only care that the team wins; they don't care how they win. And revenue, it doesn't matter how they win, just that they win. So, in conclusion, there's clear evidence that fans do not prefer offense to other types of play. And so, in light of the results from the previous study that there is a premium paid in free agency to offensive production, our current findings should inform team decision makers on how to better allocate resources toward free agent players. So profit maximizing teams should stop paying a premium for offensive production and actually do the opposite. So there's a huge discount there for defensive or pitchers. Well, thank you so much. If you have any questions, you can email me at jaehrlic@syr.edu. Thank you.